I'd like to give you a little history about what transpired prior to my being fired. It was December 17th or 18th of 2012 when I was at home and I had a few days off. I was off at that time and I wasn't even scheduled to work until December 30th again. And I had notified work that I was going to be not available because I was going to be going away to my son's house. So I received a call on this day, the 17th or 18th, telling me that I needed to go into a mandatory meeting. And I explained that I couldn't go. I had already given them notice I wasn't going to be available. So I asked what the mandatory meeting was about, and I was, the manager, I'll call her Elle, wouldn't tell me. So I said that bothered me because now I was going to put a pall on my vacation, and then because she wouldn't tell me, it sounded like it wasn't something very good. So I wasn't looking forward to coming back. So there was more said than that, though. There was pressure put on me to come in because it was a mandatory meeting and so on. So then eventually she called me back and told me the name of the patient that it involved. So, but I still had no idea what the meeting was about. So I went away and then I came back to work 3 shifts. And that was December 30th, December 31st, and January 1st, night shifts at 7 p.m. till 7 a.m. When I got back to work, I found we have this internal email, and there was a message telling me that there was a mandatory meeting scheduled for January 2nd at 2 p.m. So I thought they just didn't know what my work schedule was. Human Resources wouldn't know. So I wrote back and I said, I don't get off work until 7 a.m. that day. I don't know what this meeting is about, but I would like to have it rescheduled at a mutually convenient time. So I got a letter back saying the meeting is as stands. And I wrote back and I said, I need my sleep. I want to be well prepared for this meeting. I won't be there. So please arrange for a mutually convenient time. So then I did get a letter back saying, well, maybe we'd better find a time that fits your needs. So I told them when I would be available, and then they agreed to a 1 p.m. meeting on January 3rd. So I just want to read you my notes from that meeting because I wrote them right afterwards. So I attended a mandatory meeting on January 3rd at Blue Water Health that lasted from 1 p.m. until approximately 2:15 p.m. The attendees are listed on a letter that we received later in the day from, I'll call her C. She is the Director of Mental Health. I initially asked 2 questions, the first being what had prompted the meeting, and the second was to ask what was the problem. I was not given answers to these questions, but I was told that it was to investigate an incident that happened on a certain date in November. A video was viewed that lasted about 10 minutes, and I was asked to comment on it. I was given a copy of the nurse's notes that I had written about that day, and I was also given a copy of the emergency room face sheet. I was asked to describe what had happened as well as to speculate on a number of scenarios, and I did my best to answer any questions that were asked. I explained that I had not witnessed the patient in question's physical restraint, and if there had been any question of injury, the patient would have been examined and treated. I also explained that the ergonomics within the crisis interview room are not conducive to effective restraint of a patient because staff has ready access to only one side of the stretcher, and with one side of restraints being pinned between the stretcher and the wall. The stretcher is immovable unless it is unlocked, and to unlock the stretcher is difficult because there's very little room between the wall and the foot of the stretcher where the lock is. there's also a large table in the room with a sharp corner. I was directed to confine my comments to what I had seen on the video and to the circumstances of the event. At the end of the questioning, all parties left the room except the union representatives and me. They returned after a few minutes, and I was told that I was not told that I had erred in any way, and yet I was placed on an indefinite suspension with pay. At 4:45 p.m. on the same day, I received a letter by courier from the director, C, that had been picked up from Human Resources at 4:32. The letter was to inform me that due to the ongoing investigation, I was being placed on a non-disciplinary paid suspension until the investigation is complete, and that when the investigation had concluded, I would be contacted to arrange a follow-up meeting. A copy of this letter was sent to my manager, we'll call her L, and to my personnel file. I'm not scheduled to work again until January 9th, and so it's doubtful that I would need to be paid anything during this time off. These are my questions. Is it common practice to suspend all employees during the process of an investigation? If so, where can I find documentation or policy supportive of this practice? The event in question happened on November 10th, 2012. I don't know the date of the incident that precipitated this investigation, but why was I not suspended at that time? In other words, what I'm questioning is, as a result of the interrogation, if no fault was found with my conduct, what was different after the interrogation from the situation prior to it? Would it not have been more logical to have suspended all parties at the onset of the complaint and then to return parties to work after each had been interrogated, presuming no fault had been found? Why would a letter be put on my personnel file at this point in the investigation? Will it be removed afterwards? Considering that I'm not scheduled to work again until January 9th, was there some urgency or necessity that required a letter to be delivered by courier? I look forward to getting information that I have requested, and I ask that a copy of this letter be put on my personnel file. I didn't get any response to that letter, but that's not the first letter that I have not gotten a response to. Next, I got a letter by courier telling me, addressed to Dear Michelle, blah, 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 the letter, on Thursday, January 3rd, this investigative meeting was held with all the parties present, and this letter shall advise you that the hospital has concluded its investigation, and you are to attend a mandatory meeting on January 10th in Human Resources. And this was sent by, we'll call him N, in Human Resources, Labor Relations Consultant in Human Resources. And a copy of that was put on my file, was sent to my union, was sent to my manager, and to the Director of Mental Health Services. Now, this is a letter dated January 10th that was delivered to me by hand. Actually, it was when I went in for this meeting on the 10th. Before I went into Human Resources on the 10th, the local president of my union stopped me outside of the door and said, "Michelle, whatever happens in there, don't say anything." And I said, why? Is there something you know that I don't know? And she said, I've just found out. So I went into Human Resources, sat before a panel of people. I was there with the local president of the union and another person from the union. And this letter was read aloud to me by the Director of Mental Health Services. All the while, she had a very faint smile on her face. And it said, "Dear Michelle, on Monday, December 17th, the hospital informed you to attend a mandatory meeting on Tuesday, December 18th. You were advised that the purpose of the meeting was to investigate an incident involving a patient that occurred in the crisis intervention program on Saturday, November 10th. You advised the hospital that you would not be attending. On Friday, December 28th, the hospital then scheduled another mandatory meeting for Wednesday, January 2nd. Again, you advised the hospital that you would not be attending. Failure to attend 2 mandatory meetings left the hospital with no alternative but to ask you for your availability. The investigative meeting took place on Thursday, January 3rd. Present at the meeting were ... This letter, oh, just a minute, let me see. The purpose of the meeting was to investigate an incident involving a patient that occurred in the crisis intervention program on Saturday, November 10th. This letter shall serve as confirmation that the hospital has completed its investigation and determined that in your presence on Saturday, November 10th, 2012, a patient assigned to your care was dragged by her arms by the emergency response officers from the emergency department into the crisis interview room. One of these same emergency response officers then solely lifted the patient by her ankle into the air, while the second responded to this action and assisted the patient onto the stretcher. This action constitutes patient abuse and would require a response in accordance to the College of Nurses standards. You failed to intervene on behalf of the patient, report or document the incident. Your conduct as the assigned nurse for this patient throughout the provision of care, both before, during, and after the incident, is unacceptable and unprofessional. Your conduct does not reflect the mission, vision, and values of Blue Water Health. Blue Water Health cannot tolerate or condone this behavior, which contravenes the Blue Water Health's patient care policies and standards and the College of Nurses of Ontario's standards and guidelines, specifically but not limited to conflict prevention and management, ethics, and professional standards. As a registered nurse, you are, quote, accountable to the public and responsible for ensuring that your practice and conduct meets legislative requirements and the standards of your profession. That is according to the CNO standards of 2002. Accordingly, your employment as a registered nurse with Blue Water Health is terminated, effective immediately. As this is a violation of the CNO standards of practice for nursing, it is our obligation to report your termination to the College of Nurses. You are required to return all hospital property in your possession, including your ID, badge, parking passes, keys, and so on, immediately. Sincerely, C, Program Director of Mental Health. Did you hear anything in that letter of anything that I did with the patient? I was told by my union president not to say anything, so I didn't. I trusted the union president was acting in my best interest. No one said anything on my behalf. I got home. Well, first of all, on the way home, or on the way out, I lost my way. I was stunned. So I got home. I actually said to the local president, you know, if I were anybody else, because I consider myself a fairly strong individual. You know, I've been in the profession for a long time. I've developed some pretty good coping skills, I think, but I was stunned. I said, you know, any any other person might not be well enough to drive home. So I got home anyway, and I sat down and I wrote these notes. January 10th, 2013. I was fired today. A mandatory meeting had been scheduled for 11 o'clock this morning. Once again, I was not consulted prior to this regarding whether or not this date and time would be convenient for me. I was able to and did attend the meeting. All parties were present at this meeting that had been present at the meeting on January 3rd, with the exception of one person whose name I mentioned. And she was the person who had taken the notes for the hospital at the first meeting. Across from me sat the director, C, the manager, L, the human resources person, N, and I was able to watch their facial expressions while C read aloud the letter of termination. C's facial expression showed no concern and appeared smug as she read. Remember, I am trained to read facial expressions and so on. She read, "Your employment as a registered nurse with Blue Water Health is terminated, effective immediately." Blah, blah, blah. So L's facial expression appeared to be one of discomfort, and N's showed no concern. Blindsided, I was stunned. I walked out of the room afterwards and down the hall with R, the local union president. And it was only when I lost my sense of direction in the hallway that I realized how shaken I was. I surprised myself because I consider myself to be a strong person emotionally. I made the comment to R that if this had happened to anyone else, I would think that person might not be fit to drive home safely. I realized then that my employer had not offered me a ride home, had not offered me a taxi voucher, had not offered me any support in the way of a social worker, clergyman, or counselor. R asked me if I would like her to give me a ride home, but I said I thought I would be okay after a few minutes. The apparent reason for my termination was an error of omission and not an error of commission. I'm being accused of not reporting and of not intervening regarding an action that I did not even witness. The facts as they are written in C's letter are distorted and untrue, and I want to review the points contained within the letter of termination. Regarding paragraph 1, the chronology and the details regarding the mandatory meeting is outlined in a letter entitled Protest Management Strategies, dated January 1. Wouldn't attempting to arrange a mutually convenient time for a meeting have been a good starting point? Who completed the investigation? Nowhere in the letter does it say who is the representative of the hospital. Was there a committee? Did my boss have the abject authority to fire me with impunity? Where is there a transcript of the investigation, and why was I not given a copy? Why is dragged by her arms in this letter regarding my termination? I did not see that. I recall seeing a combative, screaming, out of control and unreasonable woman being slid across the floor, but I do not recall the method by which this was done. This was documented. I didn't think the patient was in any danger. In fact, it did seem to be safe. It did seem to be at that time a safe method of transport. Why is the comment, one of the same emergency response officers then solely lifted the patient by her ankle into the air, while the second responded to this action and assisted the patient onto the stretcher, on my letter of termination? I did not see that. And when I was questioned after having seen the video during the mandatory meeting, I informed all who were present that I didn't see it. Quote, "Nurses are not accountable for the decisions or actions of other care providers when there is no way of knowing about those actions." And that comes from the College of Nurses Professional Standards, revised 2002. What response would be required in accordance to the College of Nurses standards to an event that I didn't witness? How would C expect me to have intervened on behalf of the patient? Notwithstanding that I was not a witness to the incident as described, would she expect me to put myself in harm's way? Fortunately, I and the other patients, staff, and visitors in the emergency room were being protected by our emergency response officers, and they were having a difficult time. This woman's significant other's injuries were an indication of her violence. I did not fail to report or document the incident. I documented what I saw. There was nothing unacceptable or unprofessional regarding my conduct. As a matter of fact, the letter that I was given has not identified anything related to my conduct. I believe that my conduct does reflect the mission, vision, and values of Blue Water Health, and I believe I would be able to get testimonials to that effect. My conduct and my nursing practice have been reflective of my profession since I graduated 46 years ago. I've been working as a nurse for 49 years. My resume, it's almost 50 now, my resume and my history of professional associations and activism speak for themselves. I have good reason to believe that I have credibility with and the respect of my colleagues, including the emergency room physicians and the psychiatrists. It was only a few short months ago that the chief of psychiatry approached me to say he had heard a rumor that I was retiring. When I told him that I was entertaining the thought of retiring on the auspicious occasion of 12-12-12, he complimented me on the work I do and asked if I wouldn't consider staying for just a little longer. His comments, along with encouragement from my coworkers, were largely responsible for my decision to continue working. I also love what I do, and I very much enjoy the people with whom I work. Even though I am nearing the end of my career, I want it to end on my terms. I get goosebumps just reading this. And now that I have reviewed the letter, I intend to make a convincing argument that the apparent issue for my termination is not the issue at all. As a matter of fact, the real issue is contained in the first paragraph of the letter. You can review that if you want to wind it back. Why? Oh, here it is, I guess. Why are any of the details regarding the scheduling of mandatory meetings contained in a letter of termination? Could it be that there is some objection to the fact that on January 1st, 2013, I wrote a letter in which I dared to question procedures, in which I dared to object to having my compliance elicited by intimidation, in which I dared to express an expectation to be treated with respect and consideration, and in which I cited Webster's definition of bullying as being the act of intimidating a weaker person to make them do something? Upon examining the letter of termination that was given to me, if you take out the details of the mandatory meetings, the names of the attendees, and the actions of the emergency response officers, all of the information on Blue Water Health's mission, vision, values, and the CNO standards, what is there left for what I was fired? I believe a compelling case for my dismissal has not been made. What kind of a manager summarily and dispassionately fires a seasoned nurse with 46 years of experience and 11 years of seniority at Blue Water Health? Horizontal violence is prevalent in the nursing profession, and the experience of this behavior is psychologically distressing, threatening patient safety, nurse morale, and nurse retention. Now that is a quote from, I have the reference listed in my note here, if anyone wants it. It's from Walrafen, Brewer, and Mulvinson, 2012, on page 6 of an article, sadly caught up in the moment. I expect that further investigation of this incident will reveal the true dynamic of firing me. It was a coup. Or perhaps I should say, was it a coup? A vindictive action and abuse of power, and an extreme action of disempowerment. It seems logical that the apparent issue and unsubstantiated allegation of patient abuse at my hand was used to justify a predetermined outcome. Bullying is an act of commission. It is not only unethical, but it is now against the law, Bill 168. And it is an action for which the workplace needs to have a zero-tolerance policy. I am confident that further investigation will demonstrate that I was wrongfully fired.